Good morning, Liberty. It is Monday morning, March 18th, 2019. My name is Michael Bolden, broadcasting to you live from here in my home office and studio for the 10th Amendment Center, which is based here in downtown Los Angeles. So it is 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. Good morning to you, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to be tuning in, whether it's live or in the archive. I really appreciate you spending a little time with me today. I hope you had a wonderful weekend. Now, today's show, I want to talk a little bit about some efforts to undermine and nullify unconstitutional federal acts. If we actually believe in the Constitution, that means almost everything the federal government has done in modern times is actually a violation of what the founders and ratifiers delegated to the federal government under the Constitution. So all of it needs to be resisted in various ways and some strategy. So I'm going to talk about efforts in two states. One in Wyoming to flat out defy a federal court ruling. I shouldn't call it a ruling. It's an opinion because courts issue opinions, not laws. So one in Wyoming. And then three ongoing efforts that are happening right now. They're pending. We don't know how they're going to go, but I think they'll give you ideas on how to deal with mass warrantless surveillance, NSA spying, for example, plus federal gun control. There's tons of it on the books all the way back to 1934. The National Firearms Act is unconstitutional. The 1968 Gun Control Act, the 86 amendments to it, NICS, all of this stuff is unconstitutional, but this effort will help give you some ideas on how to deal with it. And of course, the federal asset forfeiture program that we know is called equitable sharing. Now, before doing that, I do want to say hi to some friends out in the live chat. We broadcast live through YouTube and have been doing so since last summer, since last July. We recently added Periscope, and this morning for the first time, it seems to be working. We are also simulcasting out to our Facebook page over at facebook.com/10th Amendment Center. These are all pretty mainstream platforms. We also do post the archives over to BitTube and BitChute. We have an audio-only version of the podcast over at iTunes, Google, Stitcher, Spotify, and all of our archives are over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. So over in the live chat, so we're using an app called Restream. There's a small monthly fee that allows them to transcode and put it in the best format for the different platforms. So please feel free to let me know if the audio and video is coming through good on your end outside of YouTube. I think it generally works well on YouTube, and those of you guys who join me regularly know that if there's any issues, just to refresh. So hi to Justin Bayola, Larry Clark, and Ward Lawrence on YouTube, Mo and Raphael, Sam, Sean, Brian, and a bunch of others, Barb and Larry on Facebook, Bob Brewer, Robert Sanderson, Chris Branco, Existence, a bunch of people. I really appreciate you spending some time. It's amazing that you're interested in spending time and hearing me blab about this. We do this show, for those of you who are joining us for the first time, and I know there's going to be a number through Facebook because our page is pretty large over there. We do this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. When I first started the show, I picked that time because the Ron Paul Liberty Report goes from 9 to about 9:20, and I figured we could create a block of liberty-based, Constitution-based programming. So my hopes is that, because we generally finish about 10 or a little after 10 a.m. Pacific time, my hopes is that someone will take the torch and run with it and start setting up a live broadcast at least a few days a week after we're done here and just build from there. So let's get into what's going on. First, I want to go to Wyoming. And this happened last month. And for those of you who subscribe to our newsletter, our email newsletter, 10thamendmentcenter.com/register, we sent out an update about this. Mike Meharry wrote a personal post that I'm going to cover on this as well, on what's going on in Wyoming. So you already heard about this story if you're getting our email alerts. Hopefully I'll add some additional insight to it. But if you haven't heard about it yet, last month, Wyoming Governor Mark Gordon signed a bill into law that sets the stage to authorize a grizzly bear hunt despite a federal court ruling prohibiting it. And now for most of us who live in cities or in a lot of the rest of the country who aren't in these kind of western states, which aren't really populated in many areas, the idea of dealing with a grizzly hunt or wolves, it sounds foreign to us. Like, why the hell do the states need to deal with that? What's going on? Well, people in Montana, Idaho, and Wyoming could fill you in far better than this downtown LA resident. But I'm learning through my experience watching this and working at the 10th Amendment Center for so long. I founded the organization back in 2006, that there is a serious problem with the federal government dictating rules to states, localities, individuals, ranchers, and the like on how to deal with predators attacking livestock, property, people, and the like. So there's this bill, Senate File 93, Senate Bill 93, from State Senator Wyatt Agar in Wyoming. He introduced this bill on January 16th. Back in 2017, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service actually delisted grizzly bears as a threatened species under the Federal Endangered Species Act. You can see this from the report here. If you're watching on YouTube, you have all the show links. I'll figure out how to do this on Periscope and Facebook at some point. But you can find those on YouTube and, of course, over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. So they delisted it. Now, so Mike goes on in his report, in order to manage the growing bear population, the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission scheduled a limited grizzly bear hunt for August 2018. But U.S. District Court Judge Dana Christensen issued a ruling that restored the species' threatened status under the Endangered Species Act, nixing the hunt. So the federal judge said, no, you can't do it, under his own personal decision on this. You can't do this. And so in response, early this year, the state senator introduced a bill that authorized, actually when it was first introduced, required the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission to conduct a hunt. Instead, they decided what they finally passed was authorizing the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission to make the determination if it's necessary or not. So they're saying, even though the federal court said we're not allowed to do this, you make the determination. So as Mike notes in this first report, this sets the stage for the state to nullify the federal judge's ruling. A Wyoming newspaper, of course, said it would allow the state to move ahead with an illegal hunt. Now, of course, anytime you want to undermine, nullify, resist, reject a federal court, a federal program, a federal agency, a federal congressperson, a federal executive, whatever. Anytime you do that, the mainstream media papers, whether large or small, all the publications, the TV shows, all of them, will refer to your action as illegal. They never, of course, refer to the federal action as illegal. There's not even a hint of that in the original reporting anywhere that I found around Wyoming when I was doing research on this. Well, the Senate passed the bill by a 27-1 margin, even though they were being told that you can't do this. The House approved the measure with a vote of 52-7, and with Governor Gordon's signature last month in February, the law went into immediate effect. So as of now, it is in the hands of the Wyoming Game and Fish Commission. Now, I want to go to Mike Meharry's follow-up blog on this that I think is interesting as well. Again, he points out that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service delisted it. So then they authorized the hunt, and the federal court said, no, you can't do it. So under the new law, they may conduct a grizzly bear hunt and shall issue licenses. So if they decide to do it, they are required then to issue the licenses to do it, which shall provide for the dates, times, locations of the hunt. If the Game and Fish Commission determines under the laws of the state of Wyoming, not under the state, the United States of America, if they determine under the laws of the state of Wyoming that a grizzly bear hunt would be beneficial for managing Wyoming's wildlife and for protecting Wyoming workers and other citizens and tourists of the states. So Mike points out, hey, you know what's actually illegal? The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Now, the question of whether Wyoming will follow through and authorize the hunt, will the Game and Fish Commission actually do it? I don't know. They may be federal supremacists and say, well, you may have authorized to do this, but we're making the determination that Wyoming law is then null and void because we're not allowed to do anything that a federal court tells us not to, even though the only way to actually even end up in a lawsuit is to have a conflict between the state and federal laws. Not that I necessarily want to rely on federal courts to make the decision because I don't trust them. And no one actually should trust any level of Washington, D.C. to do the right thing. They just rarely do. Once in a while they will, but then, of course, everyone wants to cite that as being amazing. So that's really the big question. Will they follow through? Now they've set the foundation to make it happen. And I did one of our episodes back last month, early in February, talking about a somewhat similar situation, not necessarily on wildlife, but on resources as well, and property, on water. Because years ago, the state legislature in Nevada, what they did was they authorized the Water Commission to deny the use of water to the federal government for implementing the Yucca Mountain Nuclear Waste Repository or Depository. And I did a full episode on this. There's a link here. I'm showing it for those. Oh, I'm not showing it. Here we go. I got to get better at my software. There we go. How one state turned off the water to the feds and won. Good Morning Liberty, February 11th, 2019. And you can hear that whole story of how this kind of went back and forth. And then the water commissioner, or whatever the name of the department there in Nevada, actually decided to follow through and said, no, we are not issuing, we're revoking permits, and we're not issuing any further. And they ended up winning. At least that's how it's played out so far. I think that's a very interesting follow-up, a kind of a connection to that. Will they follow up in Wyoming the same way that they did their neighbors in the West here did in Nevada? It remains to be seen. I'm not the one that can actually make a determination of whether this is right or wrong or good or bad for the people and property and liberty and economy of Wyoming. It should be up to them. Now, maybe somebody would say it should be up to the property owners, and I think there is certainly a case to be made, but certainly it shouldn't be in the hands of Washington, D.C. Now, Wyoming isn't alone, and this may be what a lot of people think is just kind of a small issue. A small issue. How to deal with grizzly bears, because this doesn't affect everybody, but if Wyoming follows through, just like how Nevada followed through on water, which also gives us the idea of turning off water to NSA surveillance, to turning off the water that facilitates the Bluffdale NSA data center in Bluffdale, Utah, because it relies on millions of gallons of water to cool their supercomputers. It's the same kind of concept. The state the state makes the decision, not necessarily the state government, for those of you who aren't on that team, but the people of the state can make their determination if they want government to be in charge, if they want individuals, if they want local government. It's not up to Washington, D.C. So this establishes a precedent of rejecting federal courts, federal power, federal agencies, federal regulations. And I think we should all cheer on these efforts that succeed. Whether Wyoming will do that is another case, of course. Over here on YouTube, Corey Johnson says feds need to stay out of states' business. I had an idea for a series of short videos, kick the feds out and talk about one by one short 2-3 minute videos talking about different ways, different areas to do that. I'm not sure if I'll make that happen, but I appreciate you mentioning that as well. Justin Bayola says you're a special kind of blabber, and he says he's going to be in Montana next week, so I can sympathize. I know the issue of wolves is a big deal in Montana. And Teacher of Liberty, my good buddy Joe Wolverton, who is a long time written for the New American Magazine, we cross-post a number of his articles here at 10th Amendment Center as well. He says all we need to restore liberty, individual liberty, is to make America states again. Absolutely. Absolutely. Going back to the founder's design of a limited, delegated set number of powers delegated to the federal government, enumerated in the Constitution, allows people to have so many different kinds of views, political, economic, religious, societal, all these different views, but living together under a big defense umbrella in peace instead of being at each other's throats over every single issue. Why should someone in downtown Los Angeles, like myself, tell people living in Cheyenne or anywhere in Wyoming how to deal with a grizzly bear? That sounds arrogant. There's a level of hubris to be able to dictate, to have the attitude that you want to dictate to people so far away, so different in geography and culture, how they should deal with issues facing them. So that's enough on that. I want to move forward to Missouri, because as you can see in the title of this episode, will Missouri be next? Now, Missouri hasn't actually passed the items that I'm talking about. But there are three issues: NSA spying, federal gun control, and asset forfeiture, where there are very, very good pieces of legislation that are pending. Two of them have already moved forward out of the first stage, out of many. There are many stages to this type of effort. And whether you live in Missouri or Wyoming or anywhere, I think this can give you ideas on what to do. And if you are on board with any of them, all you have to do, again, the links are in the show notes over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. All you have to do is click the links, go click the individual piece of legislation that you're interested in, and email it to your state senator and state representative. A lot of states are already done with their legislative session for this year. For example, Wyoming is done. Utah just finished. A number of states are already done, but you can still start bugging them. Hey, we need to stop gun control. So let's take a look and see what's going on here. In Missouri, the first bill I want to cover is House Bill 296 from Representative Ron Hicks. He's from Dardenne Prairie. This is a bill, and it already passed out of committee last week. And this is from Mike Meharry's report as well. A Missouri House Committee unanimously, there's no objection, so left and right. It was probably a majority Republicans and one or two Democrats. They unanimously passed a bill that would ban, quote, material support or resources for warrantless federal surveillance programs. That is the template, and I should pull this up again so you can watch if you're watching the video. House Bill 296 in Missouri bans resources to the federal government to engage in warrantless spying. This is the same model type of template that could be used in Utah to turn off resources to the Bluffdale data center, in Texas to shut down access to the Texas independent power grid that the federal government is sucking dry to, maybe not dry, but they're latched onto this like a leech to violate all of our rights, with a massive, even probably bigger data center in San Antonio in the old Sony warehouse just a few miles down the road so they can tap into a new Microsoft data center. It's probably even bigger than the Utah one. So this is the type of legislation banning material support or resources. So it would prohibit the state and its agencies, political subdivisions, special districts, or employees from assisting, participating with, or providing material support or resources to a federal agency, not necessarily just the NSA, but any federal agency, to enable it to collect or facilitate in the collection or use of a person's electronic data or metadata, unless one of three conditions apply. And of course, you can read through those conditions, which are very strict. There is a little bit of wiggle room, but a vast majority of the time, Missouri would say, we're not going to participate in this. Now, you might be wondering, why the heck would we want to do this in Missouri? There's no NSA data center that we're aware of at this time in Missouri. No one really knew what was going on until the Bluffdale Center came online. I mean, local people knew it was being built. It was kind of being built as an extension to the political subdivision. They're tapping into the water district. But those contracts are signed generally behind the scenes. There isn't a lot of public debate. There isn't much reporting on it. And then all of a sudden, you've got a 10-year contract signed with the NSA to provide all kinds of resources and support to the federal government. And we know back in 2006, they actually were maxing out the Baltimore area power grid, which is why, and that, mind you, this is in 2006, before they were collecting all of our video chats and all this other stuff through the internet backbone under Section 702 or Executive Order 12333. Before they started doing a really intense level of data, they were already maxing out the Baltimore area power grid. So they aggressively started looking for new locations. Utah, they're expanding in Georgia and Colorado. They also have the facility in Texas and elsewhere. There's Tennessee, Washington State, and every one of those they're upgrading, expanding. We know that they built some new ones, so they're probably looking for more. It's essential, even in places where they don't have a facility, to say we're not going to let you get set up. We don't want to try to deal with it after the fact. One of the biggest objections that we faced in Utah, and we still do, is that they already had a contract on the books, and so the argument was, well, this is violating contract law if you try to do this. And you can't back out of a contract. I would make the case that they made the contract in bad faith, that they were going to follow the Constitution, and under those auspices, the contract is null and void. But it does expire in 2020, and people in Utah should actually push forward with this type of legislation to say the city of Bluffdale is not allowed to renew that contract. or even on the local level, they should work to get an ordinance passed, even though I think the local guys are all on board with being buddies with the NSA, and we shouldn't like those type of people. So Missouri could actually be the third state to take action like this. Surprisingly, the first state ever to do something like this was here in California. Senate Bill 828, back while Obama was still in office, was introduced by a guy who's now in Congress, Ted Lieu, along with Joel Anderson, a Republican, a state senator down in San Diego. And it set the foundation. It basically sets the foundation to do it there. It does need to be follow-up. So California isn't necessarily shutting off resources to the AT&T NSA facility up in San Francisco yet, but it's on the books where they have the ability to do so. Now, just this last summer, Michigan followed up with a bill that does. It's basically the same as what is being considered in Missouri. And there's also a bill pending in Vermont right now as well. I don't have the bill number off the top of my head, though. So they could be the third, if not the fourth state. And we have some activists in Illinois that are working very hard to get some legislation introduced there as well. Now, that's how you can deal with undermining resources to federal surveillance programs. But it's not just that. Of course, it's gun control. I mean, everybody was so excited to get an NRA-backed president in Washington, D.C., but the Second Amendment doesn't mean the right to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed unless Congress passes a bunch of laws over a bunch of decades. Well, the status quo is garbage as well. It's garbage. There is a ton of federal regulations and laws on the books. Now, I'm not even touching the states yet, but there's a ton of federal gun control on the books all the way back to 1934, as I said on the beginning of the show here. That shouldn't even exist. The ATF shouldn't exist. We all know the libertarian joke that the ATF should be a convenience store, alcohol, tobacco, and firearms instead of a federal agency. And I agree with that. They don't. The only thing that they're constitutionally authorized to do is disband. So there's a pair of bills that have been introduced in Missouri. Now, a few years ago, this ended up passing both chambers, but and the NRA opposed us aggressively on this. They do not like state-level solutions to undermine federal gun control. Maybe because a lot of it was passed with their support, and they brag about it, unfortunately. But we saw a really good effort while Obama was in office. It is good to actually see some state legislators pushing forward to do this again. Our friend Ron Calzone with Missouri First, MOFirst.org, is getting witness forms signed to try to get this a committee hearing and move forward. But there's two bills from Representative Jared Taylor, that's House Bill 1039, and then from Eric Burleson, who used to be a state rep there, is now a senator, filed Senate Bill 367. Titled, and I'm just reading from the report, titled the Second Amendment Preservation Act. The legislation would ban any person, including any public officer or employee of the state and its political subdivisions, from enforcing any past, present, or future federal acts, laws, executive orders, administrative orders, court orders, rules, or regulations that infringe on the right to keep and bear arms. And it gives a list of things that includes this. They define what they mean by infringe, but it includes but is not limited to taxes and fees, registration and tracking, any act forbidding the ownership, use, or transfer, any act ordering the confiscation of firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition. So, for example, we know some new gun control measure that just got pushed through by the Trump administration. So this would include the National Firearms Act of 1934, the Gun Control Act of 68, and much more, such as President Trump's new bump stock ban, which also shouldn't exist. They're demanding that people turn in their firearm accessory. And a lot of gun rights owners, gun rights supporters, have told me in the last few months, like, oh, these are kiddie toys. I don't need it anyways. Well, the mentality that you don't need it, so you're okay with the government going after it. And mind you, this is the NRA-backed administration is going after it. What do you think it's going to be like with Beto or Kamala or one of these other people? They're going to take it to the next level. They're going to see that as precedent to go after something else. And you should oppose gun control at every level all the time because of this type of thing. Once you establish the precedent, it always gets much worse. So House Bill 1039 and Senate Bill 367 are an excellent model. There are similar bills that are being considered in Texas right now. I think North Dakota Republicans actually voted one down in North Dakota, unfortunately, and Mississippi Republicans rejected one down there this year. That's a session that's over as well. But these would be very, very huge steps forward. As Judge Andrew Napolitano said, talking about bills like this a few years ago when Missouri was doing it in response to Obama's gun control efforts, Judge Knapp said specifically, this type of effort would make federal gun laws nearly impossible to enforce. And while I want to see them impossible to enforce, totally impossible, I'll be very happy with nearly impossible as a big step forward. So I do encourage you, whatever state you're in, to get this legislation, copy it, send it over, say, I like this idea. Whether it can be exactly the same or a little different or whatever. A lot of state legislators, they're not too bright, or they are in an evil way. So send it over, be courteous, be kind, ask them to introduce. Maybe I shouldn't be so disparaging, but they're politicians and they're generally evil people who want power over other human beings. Now, the last one I want to cover here just briefly in Missouri is on asset forfeiture. Missouri for years has actually had some of the strictest restrictions on the use of civil asset forfeiture at the state level in the country, some of the best. But the problem is, and we had the same problem here in California, very strict restrictions on the use of asset forfeiture. But there's a federal program called equitable sharing. And the way that this plays out in practice, a law enforcement officer for the LAPD, we'll take as an example, they see that state law says they can't confiscate someone's car without a criminal conviction. So they realize this, but their budgets rely so heavily on asset forfeiture. And so therefore, they contact the Department of Justice, whatever their liaison is, whatever the local office, maybe the ATF, the DEA, one of these people, some federal goon. They contact them and they say, we think this case is a federal case. And through a process known as adoption, the federal government then adopts the case. It's no longer a local or a state case, and it's a federal case. The local law enforcement continues to do a lot of the manpower and work on the ground locally, while there's one, maybe two federal agents assigned as a lead task kind of coordinator. I don't know what terms they use. I'm describing it in my own words here. And then when they decide to take the property, they take that car, and then they auction it off. The federal government handles that part of it. And then they divvy up to about 80% of the money back to the local law enforcement. So how does that work? I mean, if the state restricts asset forfeiture and then they just decide to be like, well, everything's a federal case now. And of course, the feds like this. The feds want everything to be a federal case. And we don't. We want almost nothing to be a federal case. There's only 3 criminal acts in the Constitution that the feds should actually be dealing with. So we don't want it to be a federal case. But this encourages local law enforcement to act as federal agents rather than local peace officers. And so it encourages them to do an end run around the state law. So it's important to actually opt out of that. California followed up a few years later once this became a glaring problem and passed a bill, Senate Bill 443. While Obama was in office, a Democrat pushed this. And good old Jerry Brown, our great buddy Jerry, actually signed it into law. I was surprised. But he did, and they closed that loophole, that federal equitable sharing loophole, in about 80 to 85% of the situation. Again, I would like to see 100, but 80 is a very positive step forward. Now, this bill from Representative Shamid Dogan, who's a Republican from St. Louis, House Bill 444, as originally filed, would have closed that loophole in about 90% of the situation. But as it went through committee, and usually what happens when they go through these hearings and debates and things like that, they water the bill down and they make it into garbage. But in a very unusual turn of events, they actually strengthened the bill. They took it from 90% and then just fully opted out of the program. They said, we're going to make it stronger. If we're going to pass this thing, that must have been the mentality, if we're going to do this. And then it passed this special committee on criminal justice by a 10-0 vote. It does have to go through a procedural committee before getting to the House floor. But at this point, because it passed unanimously out of committee, it's very likely. So the states, for many states that are taking on asset forfeiture on a state level, like, for example, Tennessee had some modest reforms recently. It's important to follow up by opting out of this federal equitable sharing program. Otherwise, restrictions on asset forfeiture at the state level become almost meaningless because the feds not only hand out this cash, they encourage states to actually participate in it. And they hand out billions of dollars this way through equitable sharing. Now, tomorrow on the 19th in Tennessee, House Bill 340 which is similar, not as strong as the Missouri one. The Good Old Boy Network in Tennessee must be more effective at killing good pro-liberty, pro-constitution legislation than it is in Missouri, because there's been a ton of opposition for a subcommittee. That's not even before going to a full committee. And there's going to be a vote in the subcommittee, do or die, on House Bill 340. So if you live in Tennessee, you definitely want to get behind House Bill 340. So back over in the YouTube live chat, I see some new people here. Planet Rigo, we have a massive wool pack just up the road from my house, smack dab in the middle of one of the most popular recreational camping areas. Yeah, I mean, that's really, really a problem for people. I mean, I don't live there, but I have friends that have spent a lot of time in Idaho and Eastern Washington, Wyoming, and elsewhere. And this is a serious problem. And the federal government, that's the whole thing with relying on a far-off group of politicians, bureaucrats, politically connected lawyers, lobbyists, the deep state, all this to make determinations for what seems to be best for a local community in a small town or in a big town. They don't know. They don't live there. They don't have the experience, but what they have is political ramifications for what's good and bad in their own political campaigns. So there's no way to do that. I also want to say hi to EHP Training, who showed up late. I saw you sent an email. I don't know if it was last night or this morning, but I will get back to that in the next few days. So I appreciate the questions there. So I hope you guys found this interesting, educational, fun to watch, especially those of you who are watching this show live for the first time, whether on Periscope or Facebook Live. I really appreciate you spending some time with me on a Monday morning or afternoon. Now, if you like what we're doing here, and of course, again, we're doing this every Monday, Wednesday, Friday at 9:30 a.m. Pacific time, except a week from Friday. I will be having a day off that day. I'll give you more info on the next episode or so. But if you like what we're doing, there's a couple of very simple ways, 3 very simple ways to support the effort. 1, smash the like button. 2, leave a comment, whether it's live or in the archive. And 3, share a link to the video or audio. You can, and if you're listening on, well, here's 4th. If you're listening on iTunes, for example, leave a review. It's 5 stars, of course, or 1, whatever. If you think it's garbage, tell me it's garbage. If it's awesome, tell me it's awesome. But all of that, all of these actions, whether positive or negative, all of these mainstream platforms are easily triggered. They really are. And by that I mean the more actions that you take on them, these free 2-3 steps that you take on them, it triggers the algorithm in the platform telling it that it should show the video to more and more people. So please keep doing that, whether it's live or later on the archive. Of course, you can find all of our archives over at 10thamendmentcenter.com/goodmorningliberty. Hi out to Chris Branco, Identity for Name and File for Channel. You guys are awesome. I really appreciate it. And if you really, really want to get involved, there are a number of awesome people that I see here who are financial members, supporters of the 10th Amendment Center. If you want to join them, it starts at $2 a month. 10thamendmentcenter.com/members, all spelled out. I appreciate you spending some time. I hope you have a wonderful day. We'll see you Wednesday, 9:30 a.m. Pacific time. And thanks so much for watching.